Today we have Curtis Acosta in the studio with us. Curtis is a high school English teacher, a man after my own heart since I'm a retired high school English teacher myself. Taught almost 20 years in the Tucson Unified School District, 2 of those years at University High School and the rest of the time at Tucson High. He was one of the teachers who was involved in the Mexican American Studies program, which, as most of you know, was dismantled through all kinds of situations with the district and with the state. He's been featured in the documentary about Mexican American Studies, Precious Knowledge, which was shown around the country. He's been a part of a lot of the coverage that's been going on nationally, both on national news and in papers like the New York Times and the LA Times, and he was part of the hilarious segment on The Daily Show about Mexican American Studies as well. Curtis left TUSD in June, and he hasn't left education, but he's pursuing it in a slightly different direction, and we'll talk about that later. He's also written articles, by the way, that have been published in the English Journal, a very prestigious journal, Voices in Urban Education, and he wrote a chapter in a book on public education. Curtis, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Dave. It's my pleasure.
Oh, great. Listen, you just came back from Chicago. You had a group of students with you. Why don't you tell us something about what you folks were doing?
Yeah, well, as you know, but many people don't, once the program was dismantled, our Mexican American Studies program at TUSD, I couldn't live with that. You know, I was pretty indignant about that decision, and instead of putting that energy towards something, I don't know, either being paralyzed by it or feeling victimized, I decided to start a Sunday class at the John Valenzuela Youth Center.
Where is that, by the way?
That's down in South 6th. It's right across from the Sam Lena Library in South Tucson, and thank God for Gloria Hamlets and her fine young staff who would come into, Kayla Ramirez comes to mind, who would come every Sunday, open up the facility for us. And we had class. It was called Chicano Literature After School Studies. We've since changed the name to Chicano Literature Art and Social Studies, because what we didn't know is that this was going to take root and that we were going to be able to, I had no idea. I had no idea if anyone was going to show up, but it did. It took root, and almost every Sunday from August all the way through May, students came. We had 10 students that were our core group, and so we just came back from Chicago. I could only afford to take half the group to Chicago. It's a pretty penny to present at a national conference and called Free Minds, Free People, and they did a fabulous job speaking from their heart about their own experiences as young scholars. Also as activists, as people empowered, and young people, young women who are empowered and feel like they have they should have a say in the way school is facilitated to them, and I think that's one of the large issues, or one of the large results that we should be real proud of over the last 6 years, especially is how our youth were engaged to be, we're civically engaged to be part of the democratic process.
I'm not surprised you had, you were invited to this conference. The name of the conference was again?
Free Minds, Free People. Okay. It's a national conference. Actually, the students wrote a proposal.
Really?
Yes, they wrote the proposal, and I just edited it, and I'm not good with titles, and neither are they, so that's a tradition that goes from teacher to student. But no, they're really, this is something they wanted to do, and the solidarity out there from the nation was fantastic.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. This is a little program, Mexican American Studies, at a little school district, big district for Arizona, in little old Tucson, and yet it's had national press. I mean, if the Daily Show is going to cover what's going on in Mexican American Studies, it's big, but the LA Times is covering it all the time. I know the New York Times did as well. I know it was covered elsewhere, and in universities there were like teach-ins and all kinds of things all over the country. So what I want to ask you is, why is it such a big deal on the national stage, not just from the standpoint of Tucson?
Well, I think we were a precursor to what we've seen lately, Dave, is, the one thing about going to a national conference, especially in Chicago, is you get to hear the stories of what's going on the ground floor in local cities. And, they just went through 49 school closings. In fact, on Twitter today, one of our co-presenters at Free Minds, Free People, Sean Barrett, just lost his job. 2,000 teachers were laid off today. and he's a fan. He was a presenter with his youth at the conference, and so what we're seeing is like this, what we were going through early in 2006, all the way up until 2012 when the gavel finally rang on our program, is an engaged community to defend something, engaged students who are telling their story and how much school mattered to them, and everybody that was really proud of this program that were going to these school board meetings, and a deaf ear from the local officials. And you see that for the school board, the school closures in Chicago, 49 schools. You see that in Philadelphia. So there's a real, hearing these stories about what's happening lately reminds me of what we've been through here locally. And so I think we were part of this precursor. It also seems like that's a strategy. If it's happening here and then it happens elsewhere, it can't just be by happenstance. There has to be some strategy behind that from this reform movement in education and nationally. So that's something else where there's some solidarity brewing from grassroots organizers and educators. In
a number of ways, Arizona, not just in education, but in immigration, all kinds of areas, kind of sets the stage for a lot of the conservative movement that happens. And in terms of the education reform movement, the conservative education reform movement, certainly they were, I don't want to say they were ahead of the game necessarily, but here and Florida and Texas specifically were the states that did a lot of this. Now, the Mexican American Studies program, it wasn't just a matter of laying off teachers or closing schools. This was a specifically very controversial program, or it was made controversial. How long was the program in existence?
It was in existence since 1999, and so it was over a decade.
And nobody heard much about it. I didn't hear much about it in the community until it all of a sudden became a political issue, and we don't have to go quite into why that happened, but it was certainly picked up by conservatives here and Bill O'Reilly and God knows where. So that program has been dismantled through all kinds of machinations, and it was a very, very trying, difficult, heartbreaking process. But TUSD is under federal court order to do a desegregation program that includes something like, not exactly, but something like Mexican American Studies. So right now there's a program that's being put together of culturally relevant curriculum in English and in history, which is just beginning to roll out. Now tell me, you've had a chance to look through this curriculum? A bit.
I mean, I don't have much more insider information than any other public citizen.
But just the way it feels, does it feel like it, I'm not asking is it a substitute for there will never be Mexican American Studies again in the city? I can almost promise that's a fact, so there's going to be something different. Is this a reasonable something for TUSD to do in your opinion?
Well, I think one thing we have to look at is what we've lost, because unfortunately as things blossom with social media, we kind of lose some pieces that are really important. And so let's go back and look at our analysis a bit. We have lost a department that isn't coming back. So what has been created now is a Mexican American social student services, rather.
Oh, wait, when you say a department, what do you mean?
So the former Mexican American Studies department was concerned not only with student services, such as what the day-to-day operations of what a Latino student is going through at a school. So if a parent has an issue, they could go to the department for that. But we were also knee-deep in academic development, as far as curriculum and pedagogy, training. We were holistic.
And it was a dedicated core of teachers.
Absolutely.
And those teachers, as I understand it, maybe one will be returning.
Well, they're all returning to TUSD, but we've lost that department, that holistic department. And that's a big loss, because you had a place to go. It was I like to use a triangle as a reference, as a graphic organizer. We're teachers. so we had one part was the department, one part were the classes, and one part was the community. And the community could engage the department or the classes. So you can go to Sean Arce, who was the department head, or you could go to the department teachers. But you could also go to a teacher like myself or Sally Rusk, and you could access the community could access us that way, and it was reflexive. They were all going back and forth. That's gone now. So now you have classes at school sites and a Mexican American student services, and those aren't necessarily holistic.
Yeah. So you're not going to regain that,
Right.
and possibly there may be courses that are good. It's going to be a different something, and I want to kind of move through a couple things. I want to give you time for sure to talk about what you're doing right now.
Okay.
But first of all, this wasn't supposed to be part of this interview when we first set this up, but this week, and I have to tell you, this is being recorded on July 19th, so this week's Tucson Weekly has a story. The cover story is A Broken Community, and it's written by Marie Herreras, and Marie Herreras has written a great deal about Mexican American studies, and I'll say as a friend of the program and a backer of the program. But in this, she's talking about some of the fractures, some of the dissensions, some of the problems, and she really makes it sound pretty serious. Some people say you're too radical. Some people within the group say you're not bending enough. Other people say you're bending too much. Just all kinds of concerns like this. Now, you're more intimate with this than I am, certainly. So what's your opinion of the picture that Marie Herreras is painting here?
Well, unfortunately, I think it emboldens the folks that took away our program. I think it's what they want to hear. They destabilized our community, and now it's all fractured and it's broken. And I just reject that premise. There's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. And we decide, and me personally, I mean, and we all have to make those personal investments of how we're going to heal the pain. I did it through, working with youth again, and trying to create something out of the rubble that was left. And and I worked in concert with youth, in concert with folks from from South Tucson, the John Valenzuela Center, folks I mentioned before. And if you look Prescott College, they got involved, and so you see, I see a bunch of hope and resiliency in our community and strength coming from this. So I was really disappointed that the tone of the article seemed to be one of like despair or despondency when I see so many people working through their pain in positive ways. Even to be honest, what TUSD is doing is trying to work through things in positive ways. And what we decided to do is just to step outside and work in a different environment to provide what was lost.
So one of the things you've decided to do was separate yourself from TUSD. You decided not to come back. You weren't forced out or anything of that nature. Just briefly, give us an idea of some of the things you're doing now and what directions you're taking personally, because it's very interesting. You're really setting things out in a different and somewhat novel, innovative direction.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you used the word, because I was about to say we're trying to be as innovative as possible. And so what we've done with the Chicano Literature, Art, and Social Studies is create a class that now for high school students that receive college credit, free college credit. And that started in the spring, and I alluded to the relationship with Prescott College. And that's why I don't see the brokenness. I see hope and resiliency and healing through these type of collaborations. We just got to look for them. And I believe if you do beautiful work, if you do good work, beautiful things happen. And that's kind of what happened with our program. So we're going to be rolling that out again for this coming academic year. It's going to be on Mondays and Wednesdays instead of Sundays now, from 4 to 5:30, actually at the Tucson Center.
Bit of a pitch here. If people want to get involved,
Right.
know more about it, how are they going to do that?
You can go on Facebook and look us up there.
Look up
Chicano Literature, Art, and Social Studies.
Chicano Literature, Art, and Social
class.
Studies. Class. Got it.
And then you can also find us through an institute we're building, which we just got a final approval of, which is with a sponsored program through Prescott College. We have the Chicano Institute for Teaching and Organizing. So again, rising up from the ashes. And so it's Chito, it's Xito. They can find us that way. And we're going to have a website, chicanoinstitute.org.
Okay, listen, and I know that it's hard to remember all those things, and I'm sure some of these are flashed up on the screen as you're hearing it, but Google Curtis Acosta, anything like this. It's an interesting something. It's a work in process. Curtis, thanks so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.